fix those stupid injector wires. They're not stupid, I'm stupid for setting them up the way they were. They were actually soldered before, and never solder that kind of stuff. I just cut the factory injector wires, extended it, heat shrunk, like soldered it and then heat shrunk it, and I should have crimped it. I didn't have the right crimps at the time. So I got those, got some Raychem, redid them. They're still not mil spec, but they'll do. They'll hold up for 2 more years and then some kind of thing until I do something crazier. Aside from that, like checked all the plugs, did basic maintenance stuff. Fixed all the wires that we cut from here because we were panicking trying to find the short. We actually cut the power feed line to the DI because the way it's wired in this car, when you flip on ignition, it sends positive power to the injectors and then the DI. So the short could have been either the DI or the injector, so that's what was confusing us so much. But anyway, that's all sorted. Cleaned up any other wires that could have been problematic, reroute one of those dry sump lines just to make sure nothing's touching each other. Fixed a crack in the wastegate. There was a tiny crack on the top early this year, so I just fixed that, and then it ended up cracking all the way around as you'd expect, so pulled it off, welded it all the way around. The weld was a little bit undercut, so it's actually 16 gauge, and that's a lot thicker. That's like 1/8 of an inch. But if they were the same, then it would crack here, so that's nice and supported there now. No wastegate hanging off, so we're good. Everything else here is good. Despite this being mild steel, it's still good. So, fresh water, of course, since the intake manifold had to come off to fix the wiring stuff. Actually ended up swapping out these tires to a better set. These are almost new, they only have a few heat cycles on them, but they are still 2018 date code, so they're not the newest. I still want to get a sticker set, just because I haven't even had a sticker set on this car yet. So other than that, so I went through all this just making sure everything is good. Relays are good, fuses are good, nothing is shorting. Replaced any solders with crimps where I could, just refinement, because to be honest, I did a lot of this wiring when I was like 19 years old to get the car running, and then it stayed, so that's kind of why we had an issue. There's actually a second fuel pump wire, that yellow one, that I ran because I upgraded the lift pump from a Walbro 255 to a 450. So the 255 was working, but on a really long straight, the surge tank could potentially go empty, because in the surge tank there's a Walbro 535 that feeds the fuel rail. So huge mismatch in flow there. It works, but I just decided to upgrade it just so I don't have to think about it in the future. And then obviously the 450 pulls more current than the 255, so had to run a bigger wire for that. And then what's easier than a bigger wire redoing the whole thing? It's just adding a second wire, second relay, and then making that work. Second fuse, of course. Re-grip tape my brake pedal, because man, this thing, the brakes are really, really good, but they're actually just Turbo X rotors in the front with DTC 80 pads. They're very good, but there's a lot of knockback just because it's a solid rotor and it's so big, and I'm running an oversized caliper. At any time there's any wheel bearing flex, it's knocking the pads back. So if you see me in videos double tapping brakes on straights, that's why. So it's pretty exhausting to drive that way, but it's what I have to do for now until I find a solution. I could either put knockback springs in the calipers or go to two-piece rotors or whatever. Honestly, I'm after the least expensive solution that works, because those Turbo X rotors are very well priced, so I can get them for nothing. So other than that fuel pump, not much else has changed. I actually had to pull everything off this back end just to access the cell. It took a few days, but it looked like I was doing a lot, but not really. Like, wing has to come off, window, back of the trunk so I can get in there, and then the whole fuel cell pulled it out because it's an ATL, and then yeah. Other than that, engine stuff, I actually cut the oil filter open. Thing looks beautiful. Like, literally zero shavings in it. My daily driver looks worse, which is great. So, also been getting questions too. That is a 2-liter. It's just a B204. Well, just is kind of an understatement. It's got rods. H-beam rods, which are probably worse than stock, or can take less torque than stock, but they're a lot lighter, and I can actually use an ARP 2000 series bolt in it. And then revving at 8,000 RPM, the stock rod studs do not like that. I feel safe around 550 foot-pounds of torque max, which means to make more power I have to rev it higher. So to make the power, rev it to around 8,000 at 550 foot-pounds of torque. That's well into, I gotta do the math, so that's like around 900 horsepower, so that's more than enough. Aside from that, it's stock pistons, stock ring gap, because the stock ring gap is actually big enough to be a nitrous gap, which is ridiculous. If anyone wants to know why these engines are so good too, it's because of these stock pistons. There's a lot of material to them, and their expansion coefficient is really low. So they actually have really tight piston to wall clearances, so they get very little blow by. Like, even compared to T7 pistons, I actually put T5 pistons in my other car, and then the blow by just disappeared. The oil is beautifully clean and everything, even though I put higher mileage, older style pistons in them. So these pistons are great because of that. You can actually have a big ring gap without having too much blow by, so then that means you won't pinch a ring on anything. And then the surface area on the bottom is so high that you're actually dissipating a lot of heat into the oil that's being sprayed at the bottom of it. So that's why those pistons survive. Only thing I do to them is I polish the tops. You'll probably see it in like a future engine build if I build a spare engine, but I mirror polish the faces just so less carbon sticks to it, but also for some heat reflection. Obviously they get dirty, but you know, I just like to do it. Obviously it has cams, 268 billet cams. The head I spent many hours porting. Stock valves, obviously valve springs, stock hydro lifters. Other than that, yeah, like what really makes this engine a good combo is because of the dry sump. It's I actually use the factory pump. This is just a scavenge. So this just pulls, this is a 3-stage, this just pulls out of the dry sump pan underneath. You can see how that's set up. And then that blue fitting comes directly from the tank. It's a -16. So the factory pump actually just pulls from the tank. So it's like having an infinite pickup for a factory pump. It's doing it that way makes it a really good setup because you don't have to spend time fiddling with oil pressure with the new pump and getting it to flow right and then getting the speed right so it doesn't cavitate or do anything weird. You don't have to run like a separate oil filter housing if you route it differently. You don't have to go through a lot of things. It's more cost effective, and in this case it works because these oil pumps are good on these engines and I trust them up to around 9,000 RPM, me personally. So, and then also what makes this thing work is just clearancing the bottom end properly. It's the thing that not a lot of people do. If you just buy, you can't even get +1 thou, +half a thou bearings for these things. The factory bearings are clearanced at like what, like a thou, like 8/10 of a thousandth of an inch to like a thou and a half, I think, is like the tolerance for the mains. I gotta look that up again, but that's way too tight for the amount of power you push through these things. I run around 3 to 3.5 thousandths on the mains and 2.5 thousandths on the rods. That's what's worked for me. And then mirror polished everything, and then obviously what do you call them, teardrop the oil ports in the crank. And then because it's a straight shot oiling crank, if you can maintain oil pressure as it's revving out, even steady, you're flowing more oil because that crank is trying to throw the oil at the rod bearing. So that's the technical explanation as to why these engines are so good. But yeah, other than that, it's like kind of stock, I guess. Secret to making power in this thing is a really good turbo. Good intake manifold. It's actually a dual plenum. It doesn't look like much, it just looks like a weird transition, but there's actually a tiny slot that's equal all the way across. And then this top plenum is what you'd normally see as that rounded cone shaped tube, but I just made it squared off just because of time constraints and fabrication constraints. So dual plenum, nice and equal flow. Injectors are at the back of the runner here, so you get the best atomization. When the car is running, these actually get pretty cool. And then long tube header. Basically, could do another video on this kind of stuff, but basically getting the back pressure as low as you can right at the port so the engine's happy breathing, and then you want all the back pressure down here so that the turbo is happy, because the turbo wants high back pressure, engine wants low back pressure so it can breathe. But I kind of dove in a bit deep there. I might do that in other videos, let me know what you like hearing about. But yeah, competing on Sunday, and it should be better than last time since we're going to a track that we're actually experienced at. I'm experienced at, and it's not the first event of the year, so we don't have to go through tech inspection all over again and then sticker the car out and all that. So it should be good. Stay tuned.